On September 25, 2024, Tropical Storm Helene formed over the warm Gulf waters off the southernmost coast of Central America, gained strength, wove its way around the Yucatan Peninsula, then became a hurricane. In less than 48 hours, meteorologists were stunned as the storm exploded into a Category 4 storm and struck the coast near Perry, Florida. 2 days later, the storm was downgraded and stalled over western North Carolina, causing billions of dollars in damages while claiming over 250 lives. Helene was the deadliest hurricane to strike the mainland U.S. since Katrina in 2005. 1 week later, Hurricane Milton formed in the western portion of the Gulf off the Texas coast. Milton grew even stronger than Helene, becoming a Cat 5 beast with gusts of over 212 miles per hour, the second most intense Atlantic hurricane ever recorded over the Gulf of Mexico. The storm traveled east across the Gulf, which almost never happens, and a day later, Milton came ashore near Siesta Key, bringing an unprecedented number of deadly lightning strikes and nearly 150 tornado warnings. The words weather modification were once considered the rantings of conspiracy theorists, but are now being talked about in the open. Exactly 9 years ago, on September 24, 2015, host Elizabeth Doherty spoke with weather researcher Dane Wiggington about weather modification, how it's being done, by whom, and why. From the Doherty Report archives, here's Elizabeth Doherty.
Right now we're talking with Dane Wiggington. He's the lead researcher for geoengineeringwatch.org. He's investigated all levels of geoengineering from chemtrails to HAARP. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for your willingness to help us shine some light on this critical issue.
Well, we wanted to talk with you because so many people are concerned about the drought in California, and we came across your theory, and we'd like to share that with the listeners. What is your theory as to what is causing this huge drought?
Actually, we're not operating off theory. We have satellite data imagery, lab testing, video footage of tankers spraying at altitude. We absolutely positively know that there is massive aerosol spraying going on, not just over the eastern Pacific off the U.S. West Coast, but around the globe. So we try to stand on what we know is not theory. And again, with the satellite images we have of the blanket grid pattern spraying, in the lab tests, we have about 70 at the state-certified lab in Northern California alone. So these are called solar radiation management programs. It's important if we stick to the science terms, if people, when they're investigating this issue, stick to the science terms, they'll find hard science. And so what this does, when you aerosolize and they put these light-scattering particles in the atmosphere, which is part of, again, solar radiation management, about 150 patents on this, their attempt to try to deflect some of the sun's incoming thermal energy radically disrupts the hydrological cycle. Hard science, peer-reviewed study to prove particulates in the atmosphere will greatly diminish and disperse precipitation. That's what we're seeing.
Now, before we get into the science of this, because we do really want to delve into it with you, are there people who are saying that this is all conspiracy theory? What sort of reaction are you getting from people?
Depends on who they are. If you're talking about agency people, and I know many of them, that's what they're paid to say. Whether they believe it or not, we can all speculate. I've been told off the record, I'm face-to-face with NOAA scientists, a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, who told me, and I quote, we all know this is going on. We don't know what to do. We have no First Amendment protection. Meeting congressional reps at the California State Capitol about 90 days ago. I've been to the Capitol many times, had meetings with the Lieutenant Governor. I spoke in front of Cal Energy Commission, Barbara Boxer's office, high-level EPA meetings, but I was finally just told by congressional rep off the record, same thing. We all know what's going on. We don't know what to do. I mean, this is a very, very big elephant in the room, if you will. But it's important to understand people whose paychecks and pensions depend on them not knowing about or not talking about this issue. That's why they don't. But at what point, we're all knee-deep in water on the deck of the Titanic right now. The biosphere is imploding. Earth's life support systems are imploding. Lots of damage to the planet from lots of different sources. I don't deny that. Anthropogenic damage to the planet is immense. But no greater single source than climate engineering. It's the greatest single assault on the planetary life support systems in the web of life ever launched by the human race.
And this is being run by the EPA, did you say?
We have governments around the globe, certainly inarguably collaborating on this issue. They're all covering each other on this issue. And if you look at the reasons why, again, geoengineering is ultimately about power and control. These programs have been going on since the late 40s. But the collaboration between governments, all of them have a vested interest in hiding the severity of the climate disintegration as long as possible from their populations. So they're all engaged in this. And when we have, for example, China openly announced they were engineering snowstorms until they did $1 billion worth of damage to Beijing. Anybody can search this online. I don't want anybody to believe anything I'm saying. Search it online. You'll find mainstream media covered this. It's through a process of chemical ice nucleation sprayed into clouds. They can turn what should have been a rainstorm into a heavy, wet snow that does cataclysmic damage, and it does cool the temperatures down on the ground for a bit. But at what cost? At what cost? It's the negative effects far outweigh any perceived benefits. So we have, again, for their own interests, we have governments around the globe, even normally opposing powers, collaborating on this issue. And again, we have huge statistics. For example, global dimming. We have science study to prove that about 25 to 30% of the sun's direct rays no longer reach the surface of the planet. This is the express goal of climate engineering. So every single dot connects.
So there are people in the governments who are saying that we have to be concerned about climate change. Are you saying that they are trying to combat climate change or that they are causing the climate change?
Well, it's a complicated question. They are trying to hide the severity of what's happening and making it worse at the same time. An example I often use is the chemical Corexit in the Gulf of Mexico. That chemical, although it was banned around the globe, was used to help hide the problem, not to fix the problem, not to make it better, to help hide it.
Correct.
And the environmental impact report stated that chemical made the situation 52 times more toxic, but they used it anyway because they were most interested in hiding the problem. Same mentality here, and it's important to consider whether has been and is being used as a weapon of war around the globe, and most intensively by the largest military in the world. Who is that military? The United States.
Right.
It's bigger than the next 10 militaries combined. So we have not just historical fact, Project Popeye in Vietnam, major weather modification, weather warfare. We also have every single Middle Eastern country that's been destabilized and toppled recently. Every single one has been subjected to record protracted drought, which destabilized the social structure prior to other factors taking place. We have leaders of countries, like the president and vice president of Iran, stating on the floor of the UN, not covered by our media, that their countries were being droughted out by NATO weather modification programs. So, again, this is the covert weapon of choice. They're not about to give it up, no matter how much damage it does. And when people ask why would they do this to themselves, why would they detonate 2,000-plus nuclear bombs, contaminating all life on Earth? Why would we be building 60 more nuclear power plants right now when Fukushima may kill us all? So we're not dealing with sanity.
I guess that goes into my next question, which is why would they be doing this in California?
Now, one, we have to remember this. Those who think that the government is there for the common good need to recheck their reality in a big way. Our government is nothing more than a criminal cabal that exists for its own ends, period. So in the case of California, now, if we compare California, for example, to the Middle Eastern countries that were destabilized with drought, when a population doesn't know where its next drop of water, next bite of food is coming from, they're not too capable of standing up and looking at the bigger picture. They're most concerned about their immediate existence. In the case of California, I would argue there are so many elements in the equation, so far past critical, that can't be hidden much longer, that the government has a number of objectives. One, California can be looked at as a climate sacrifice zone. Things that we know they are doing in the Arctic are affecting weather as far upstream as California. And what the spraying they do over the eastern Pacific affects the jet stream, which eventually ends up putting or not putting moisture in the Arctic where they can chemically nucleate it. It's a very complex system. So in some aspects we can see California as a climate sacrifice zone. But the diminishment of precipitation over California has been so aggressively done and so consistent that we simply have been forced to look at California as a target as well. And when we look at those who make profit in the short term, like weather trading derivatives, and there's a fortune being made right now on weather trading derivatives, the gambling casino in the market that's run by the very people who do the weather modification, they win when crops fail if they have bet against those crops. So we have the disaster capitalists making money while the ship is going down. But in the bigger picture sense, the bigger wheels turning are the fact that they are simply trying to keep populations mired in their own misery as long as they can while the power structure is preparing for what I would argue is no less than the collapse of civilization as we know it. And if we look at hard stats, that kind of mention will sit a lot of people back in their chair. If we look at hard statistics, we know that we have lost almost 60% of Earth's wildlife in the last 40 years. 60%. We know we're losing 200 to 300 species of plant, animal, and insect a day. We know crops are failing around the globe. Mongolia just lost 80% of their crops. We have marine ecosystems collapsing, especially off the U.S. West Coast. Fisheries being shut down. Life as we know it is changing rapidly.
As far as California as an agricultural state, because they were supplying domestically a lot of our produce, and now we have to go to places like Mexico. What does that do? Why would they do such a thing? And is that more about this weather trading derivative, or is it more about NAFTA, or what is it about?
Derivatives, again, is a sideshow. It's if I could use a metaphorical example, it's Monsanto with their drought-resistant seeds, their aluminum-resistant seeds, and aluminum is one of the metals in these programs falling out of the sky. That sort of disaster capitalism would be comparable to a pirate filling his pockets with treasure while the ship goes down. It's not going to matter much longer. So, again, it's important to remember that they, and they, if we try to identify who they are, who's at the top of all the insanity, all roads lead back to the central bankers, all roads. It's where the money comes from. So that's why we can't get anything out of agencies. State agencies, for example, California is in the hole about 50 to 60 billion, 40, 50, 60 billion every year. Nobody asked where last year's deficit went. It just seems to vaporize. The states are being kept afloat by the central banks, trickles all the way down the ladder. So none of these agencies will say anything because, again, it comes back to their paychecks, their pensions. And this is not about the common good. Imperative to remember that what's going on in our skies is not about the common good. Those in power are not here for the common good. And the fact that this is directly related to the aerosol spraying, again, whatever anyone wants to theorize about the motives overall, the fact that the lack of precipitation is a direct result of the ongoing aerosol spraying programs can't be argued. It cannot be argued. I spoke in front of the California Energy Commission in Sacramento at a meeting where they approved the purchase of a $200,000 light spectrometer to identify, quote, particulates of unknown origin, like the state of California doesn't know where particulates are coming from, that are costing the state 20 to 40% of its rate. And they purchased a $200,000 meter. We've never seen it or heard from it since. It got swept under the rug immediately. That's how much control those in power have. They will stomp out any fire that starts to shine a light on these programs, at least so far.
Well, we know states like California sell bonds, municipal bonds, to support their infrastructure. Do we know who has the biggest stake in California right now, or is that outside your purview?
Well, there's a lot of obscurity in that arena. And we have, your question is valid, and that leads into another aspect of disaster capitalism. And we've seen this happen in Australia. Huge regions were droughted out from climate engineering, and those regions were then subsequently sold for pennies on the dollar. In fact, whole towns even were sold. Multinational corporations bought those regions, and now rain is falling again. So we can look at that aspect of it. But on the bigger picture, one of the major aspects that climate engineers are trying to hide, why they're doing so much in the Arctic specifically, there's mass methane release happening in the Arctic right now. And I encourage your listeners, please don't believe anything I say. Please search online, Arctic methane emergency. Start reading about it. There's enough methane in the Arctic, in the Laptev Sea, if it's all released. This is frozen methane on the seafloor that's thawing and releasing. And that, in many ways, traces back to geoengineering also, because geoengineering has changed upper level wind currents, which changes ocean currents, warm water pumping into the Arctic now, along with the other anthropogenic sources of damage. That methane, there's enough mathematically to cause a Permian-style mass extinction 100 times over on planet Earth. And they are trying desperately to hide the fact that that's unfolding. In the attempt to hide it, they're making it worse. This is the pharmaceutical cure for planet Earth. If we look at, how many commercials have you guys seen that,
right.
Take this for this ailment, and here's 50 other things that are, 100 times worse than what we're trying to treat. The next commercial's an attorney. So
basically what you're saying is they're treating the symptoms, but not the actual problem.
Well, they're hiding some of the symptoms and making the overall situation exponentially worse. If we look at the California fires, for example, and we look at all the aspects of geoengineering we know are helping to fuel those fires. And if you look at our data from geoengineeringwatch.org, again, it's our website. We don't sell anything. We're non-political. We're simply trying desperately to get the word out on this issue. But if you look at our data going back several years, you'll see that everything we said is happening. It couldn't not happen if climate engineering continued, and it has. So in regard to the fires, you have contributing to the fires, unprecedented drought, which is directly related to the climate engineering, as I've stated. You have bioavailable metals, which we have peer-reviewed study to prove are highly toxic to root systems. They cause the organisms to stop nutrient uptake. They die a slow, protracted death. We have massive ozone layer depletion. So we have incredibly intense UV. When people think the sun feels hot on their skin, it's not their imagination. We're seeing UVB levels 1,000% higher than we're being told. 1,000%. That's 10 times higher. It's burning the bark off of trees. That's killing the forests. And we have an incendiary dust. These metallic particles used in climate engineering, these light-scattering particles, are flammable. They coat the foliage. We have more lightning because the atmosphere is more conductive because of these metallic particles. We have less rain, as I said. We have the worst of all conditions. So we have fires absolutely, completely unprecedented, out of control. As those fires burn, more carbon in the atmosphere, more heating. More of that soot falls on the ice in the Arctic, making it dark, causing it to absorb heat, melting it faster, all of which caused the geoengineers to spray even more to try to block some more of the heat in spite of everything it's causing. You can see the downstream effect. It's cataclysmic. This is a runaway train of total, out-of-control military-industrial insanity.
We also see companies that are water bottling companies pumping out the remaining amount of water that's in California, and no one seems to be stopping them. Have you talked about that at all?
It's true. You know, we have the corporate interest always superseding the interest of the citizen. There's no question about that. In the case of the rain, you know, I know some feel in California that it's just a misallocation of water that's going on, and again, it's not right what the water companies are doing. I don't argue that. But in my particular location, to put this into context, the drought's not 4 years old, it's 8 years old. So that's not really being disclosed correctly. In my location alone, in the last 8 years, we're almost 240 inches of rain short. That's a hell of a lot of rain.
Right.
So the drought is very real. The forest is dying by the day, literally dying by the day. And it's been so hot here. I mean, the temperatures in California are immensely over any historical norm. And we're seeing an underreporting of temperatures. Official temperatures are being underreported, not overreported, underreported, about 4 to 5 degrees. That's huge. A friend of mine, colleague of mine with the Union of Concerned Scientists has confirmed 4.6 degrees. This is massive. It means it's much hotter than we're being told even. Climate engineering making that worse, not better. And for those that don't know, photosynthesis stops at 104 degrees. No more photosynthesis. So we have temperatures in California now that are commonly above what any organism can grow at. From every direction, again, it's getting bad fast.
News reports we've seen about you, they generally quote people from UC Davis. And we know, because we've interviewed these people from UC Davis, they're all paid to say things that they're paid to say. I don't understand why in these news reports and things that we've seen online about you, they always seem to quote them.
That is interesting, isn't it? So you saw the CBS coverage that we just got?
Yes.
So on that note, and with that particular atmospheric scientist, and absolutely paid to say what he says, let's just look in context for those with common knowledge. Weather modification has been going on for many decades on a large scale since the late 40s. There's programs going on every single day around the globe. There's 200-plus programs going on in the U.S., publicized programs every single day.
Right, that's not a secret.
And that so-called academician has the nerve to compare the subject of weather modification with aliens. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is so incredibly ludicrous. And people like that who try to marginalize what is absolute verifiable fact by making such a ludicrous statement as he made, we are simply pointing out to them that you're on the record with this. You're on the record helping to hide crimes that are killing our children. When the population wakes up to the fact that you have helped to hide these crimes, they will hold you accountable as an accomplice to these crimes. And we're letting them know that. I mean, I hope that we soon reach the level of Nuremberg-type trials for people like that who are simply doing exactly what you just stated, lying for a paycheck.
Now, we've seen pictures online of some of these planes that supposedly do the spraying. we couldn't tell if those were real or not real. Have you personally seen anything like that?
Oh, more than I could count. And as far as the footage we have footage that's absolutely inarguable. It's from sources that we know of. We have lab tests that we've taken ourselves. A lot of those lab tests are from, I say we have U.S. Forest Service biologists who work with us, fish and game biologists, former biologists, because they can't do this when they're still working for the government. So in regard to film footage, lab tests, these are taken, again, by former government scientists, tested at the state-certified lab, and there's simply no arguing this, but this is the kind of denial we have from our quote-unquote elected officials who didn't recognize any of the data I just mentioned, even though it was taken by former government scientists. They wanted something else. So this is on film. I served Congressman Doug LaMalfa up data from California EPA after a previous meeting with him the week before, and he said he needed data from a source he could recognize. I gave him data from California EPA proving aluminum flowing through the streams of Northern California. And what did he and his staff do? They said, well, we don't recognize California EPA as a credible source.
Oh, my gosh.
What do you do with that?
Some of the counties have had their own meetings, cities and counties in California. I believe Bakersfield had some meetings about the aluminum.
They have. The reason this issue is so important, and again, it doesn't matter whether people believe it's going on or not. It doesn't matter. They will not be able to hide from the consequences. They will not be able to hide. In fact, another red flag that just went up that corroborated what we've said for many years, that there was a bigger factor killing the bees, not just the farm chemicals. Now we have peer-reviewed study proving, and anybody can search this online. Please don't believe me. Just search bees aluminum, and you'll find peer-reviewed study proving the bees are packed full of aluminum. It's killing them. It's giving them Alzheimer's and dementia-like symptoms. So much aluminum, in fact, 70 times more aluminum than what it takes to cause Alzheimer's or dementia in a human being. So we have massive red flags going up everywhere. Autism statistics from MIT, the latest statistics from MIT, on the current trajectory, 1 out of 2 children will have autism in 10 years. 1 out of 2. That's how much metal's falling on us. So why is geoengineering so important? Because it's killing everything, including us. And if we can't think clearly, and all of us are losing our cognitive ability because of the absorption of these materials, if we can't think clearly, game over.
You have this information on your site as far as footage or photographs or anything like that?
Everything.
Okay.
Everything. We have film footage of tankers spraying, lab tests. Again, the site, we do not sell anything non-political. We're simply an archive of data for people to understand what's going on. We have, right at top center, a tutorial of a high bypass turbofan engine on the, quote, the contrail lie. What we see in our skies, almost exclusively, are not condensation, and we know that from the high bypass turbofan jet engine. There's a full tutorial right there to explain the technicalities to people as to why this is not condensation. And again, we have film footage of these tankers up close, turning on and off, KC-10s, KC-135, C-17 military tankers. All of that is right on our site. We encourage people to share that data. You can make DVDs from our presentations. Nothing's copyrighted. We don't exist for our own benefit in any sense. We're simply trying to sound the alarm to save what's left of our planet.
And this is at geoengineeringwatch.org.
Dane, it's not just the weather in California. The very odd winter that we saw last year in New England. Was that related to anything that's going on right now and to what you're talking about?
A direct result of it. Let me elaborate on that. If people want to search engineered eastern U.S. cool down, they'll find a number of articles we've done on the subject that show the maps, show the NOAA maps, show the jet stream patterns to make clear this is how much power they have over the weather system at this point. They can manipulate the jet stream, the upper level wind currents, with ionosphere heaters. You guys have both probably heard of HAARP, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. It's an ionosphere heater, so that your listeners understand that's a ground-based, unbelievably powerful radio transmitter, 3.5 billion watts, several dozen of these facilities around the globe, an unknown number of smaller facilities, very large number. When these energies are concentrated on the ionosphere, it triggers an electrical chain reaction, which heats the ionosphere as much as 15,000 degrees. That's publicized by the U.S. government. So over hundreds of square miles, and that heating causes pressure changes which can steer the jet stream. So we had this persistent pattern, the, quote, ridiculously resilient ridge over the west, which blocked all our rain, and that pumped the jet stream through Alaska, which gave Alaska one of its warmest winters ever. And then the jet stream is pumped south, picking up moisture from the Gulf of Mexico and pumping it right back up the eastern seaboard where it's chemically nucleated over Boston, for example.
Right.
And what do What did we see on TV all winter long? Boston snow, Boston snow, Boston snow. It's all we saw. And this is to skew the perception of the American population, especially in the eastern half of the U.S., that it's cold, cold, cold out there. When in California, we were 90 degrees with no snow, 14,000 feet up in the Sierras. Nothing. Zero. So that's part of what makes climate engineering a sacrifice zone. You don't get something for nothing from nature. When they're trying to create engineered cool downs in one zone, someplace else suffers. Did you guys happen to see the 75-pound ice boulders on Lake Michigan?
No, I did not.
I would encourage your listeners to search that one. Ice boulders, Lake Michigan. That phenomenon's happened the last 4 years. Now, how does something like that just happen? That's historically unprecedented. And why aren't the meteorologists talking about it? Because they're paid to ignore it or explain it away. If you see the pictures of that, you'll really be perplexed. These massive beach ball-sized ice boulders all over Lake Michigan is from chemical ice nucleation, which starts a nucleus that begins to expand on itself. So when you have such a profound phenomenon that's never happened before, wouldn't more people ask questions? We live in a society where people are so bent on their iPhones that you could start the sky on fire. They wouldn't notice it. So this chemical nucleation process, this was in 40-degree lake water, by the way. What do you even have ice in 40-degree lake water for?
Right.
And we have lab tests. If people search engineered snowstorms, some of our articles have lab tests that show them. They will probably scarcely believe what they see with their eyes, but the lab tests show the power of chemical and biological ice nucleating agents. A few drops in a vessel of water will freeze it instantly. We have patents for this, one to NASA. Why would we think this is not going on when we see every sign of it going on? So they can cool down large regions, they can engineer snowstorms, but at what cost? At cost of just decimating what's left of Earth's life support systems. What
do you think this winter looks like?
I'll tell you what they have scheduled, and when I say they have scheduled, I mean exactly that, because the weather mapping is done for NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the National Weather Service. Their mapping is done by Raytheon, a private defense industry contractor who is neck-deep in weather modification. So you have the Foxes running the hen house.
Right.
Lockheed Martin does it for the FAA, so they tell us what the weather's going to be. So they show colder than average all across the southern tier of states and much warmer than average all across a band across the north of the country. So ask yourself, with an El Nino, with record-shattering warm oceans, record-shattering, and record warmth all around the U.S. South, why would it be colder than average in the South? How could that be? I mean, the laws of physics dictate, certain consistencies. It's because that's where they're going to pump all the moisture, and they need the moisture to do the chemical nucleation, just like they did in Boston last year. So when you see the precipitation map for the continental U.S., it matches almost exactly the temperature maps. A freezing, wet, cold eastern U.S. and a hot, dry western U.S. Again, all these dots are part of climate engineering and part of processes that we have patents for. We have congressional documents for the global governance of geoengineering. We have so much posted at geoengineeringwatch.org. We're not asking anybody to believe us. We're just asking them to investigate.
So as far as the Alzheimer's goes, I understand the increasing rates in autism are already happening. We've seen it over the past 10 years, and that's going to continue to happen, according to you. What about Alzheimer's? How much is that going to increase?
Well, let's look at some hard statistics on that, on the actual increase. In the case of autism, since 1975, we've gone from 1 in 5,000 to, by 2014, 1 in 47. Right. That's over a 10,000% increase. We know these programs have been going on the whole time. The whole medical community is scratching their heads as to what's going on because they won't acknowledge this issue. We have the Alzheimer's Association stating that they don't recognize any connection between aluminum and Alzheimer's, even though there's peer-reviewed study to state that connection is there, inarguable. We have members of the aluminum board. It's a commercial directors, around the globe, sitting on the board of the Alzheimer's Foundation. How convenient. So the Alzheimer's Foundation, I tried to sponsor one of their events for $500 just to have a booth to pass data out to people that climate engineering was going on. They wouldn't allow that because they refused to recognize the aluminum connection. So what are the stats with Alzheimer's and dementia? We have now in the continental U.S., 1 in 3 seniors dies with Alzheimer's and or dementia. And we are all on that path. 1 in 3 that has that diagnosis. So again, all of us are on the path from cognitively functional to completely dysfunctional. All of us. Doesn't matter where people believe it or not. It's real. It's happening. We have the lab test to prove it. mountain of metal falling out of our skies. It's not coming from China, as people want to leap at. There's a lot coming from China, but aluminum is not one of the metals that migrates across oceans. We have state studies to prove that. So again, there's one source for this, and we know exactly what that source is, and there's simply no rational argument to deny this is happening. Also consider this, the U.S. military. I encourage your listeners to look this up. All of them state on the record, greatest national security threat of all, most immediate threat, is climate change. Why would we think they're not engaged in these programs when they've stated on the record their desire to, quote, own the weather?
Wow.
And that document's also on our site.
That is insane. Well, we thank you so much for the information. When I set out to do this interview, it was really more about manipulation of the water. I really didn't understand the extent to which they're manipulating the air. People hear about chemtrails, but they don't really understand the details of it. So I hope people will go to your site at geoengineeringwatch.org. We've been talking with Dane Wiggington. He has an extensive background in solar energy. He's a former employee at Bechtel Power Corp. We thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you both for helping us shine a light on this most dire issue.
Join us for the live feed of Food and Travel Nation with Elizabeth Doherty, now at our new time, Saturday afternoons at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, on foodandtravelnation.com, TalkStream Live, radio.net, and on the Odyssey and TuneIn apps.
I love you guys. Thanks for telling us the truth.
Thanks for listening to Food and Travel Nation with Elizabeth Doherty, the truth about food and travel.